Okay, so welcome to our last synchronous learning session. To the four of you that are here, thank you so much for coming in today. So for today, ang gagawin natin is that I'll be discussing a little bit on how you're going to personalize an animation. And also, the second part is I'm going to show you how to personalize your walk cycle. So kind of like this one, which is an angry type of walk cycle. Or before that, let me just give you some idea of what you're going to do for your activity. Kasi you have to kind of get some context so that when I'm discussing a lot of these things right here, alam nyo na kung ano yung ifo-focus nyo on. Okay, so let's have here a personalized walk cycle. So actually, there are two activities pala. So the first one is a reflection. So this reflection is kind of like an ender for the ender for animation 12a. So parang during our first meetings, we were talking about what's your favorite animation. So with this one, it kind of just gave us an idea of why we're even doing this one in the first place. So it's more of like a bare bones thing. It can be a bit more paano ba? It's a bit more surface level understanding sa animation. So for now, ang gagawin natin is a bit more deep in terms of what you think makes an animation special. So ito, bahala kayo on how you're going to interpret it. So you can either be more technical about it, you can be a bit more superficial about it, quote unquote. Sharing will be done on a posted discussion on Canvas. So the Canvas version will be available tonight. So please take note of that one. Also, this activity is optional. However, if you do create the activity, you'll be given 5 additional points for your activity 10. So for your activity 10, I do recommend that you create the reflection as well. Kasi the personalized walk cycle, it's kind of huge in terms of its rubrics or in terms of its points. So it's like 100 points. So 5 criteria: walk cycle modifications, timing in betweening, cleanup, and record keeping procedures and quality control. Each a total of 20 points. Ayun, nadagdagan tayo. Each a total of 20 points. So we have a total of 100 points. So for this one, ang pinaka main instruction natin is based on the character used in the previous module. Modify the standard walk cycle and animate it using your original character. So original character meaning is the one that you've used for your Module 9 activity. For your modified walk cycle, you can choose one emotion, style, or situation. So we'll be discussing that a little bit later. However, please do not use an angry walk because that is the one that I will be using for the demonstration for today. Time chart. Bahala kayo on your time chart. You can use at least 8 drawings to create your walk cycle. If you want to add more, that's okay, pero I don't really recommend it kasi nga, in terms of time pressure, baka hindi natin makayanan. Cleanup is you can use a messy cleanup line for the keyframes and in-betweens. And we also have the same submission protocols. So if you're, kasi natanong ko sa previous section, you can use both traditional and digital at the same time. So probably for some of you, personally, if I were to create this activity, gagawin ko yung action digitally para makita ko yung line testing. And then from then on, I will now move to traditional, probably print this one, and then move on to traditional to kind of like finish the rendering. Kasi I would like to do rendering and cleanup more on a traditional manner. So you can use whichever medium you would like to, if you can, or either traditional or paperless, or if you want both, you can also use both. So with that one, please take note of the following. Kailangan ma-modify natin yung walk cycle. So with that one, let's move on to the heart of this lesson, actually personalizing an animation. So your previous activity or your previous module, we were talking about how to create a walk cycle. So yung walk cycle na yun, it's essentially a template o kaya naman it's the standard. So when you talk about a standard animation, it's very good for beginners because it helps them understand how to do a walk cycle. It helps them understand what comes first, ano yung mga poses, how it kind of moves, how your feet kind of move, bakit kailangan natin ng lowest point and highest point, and so on and so forth. However, those types of templates can only do so much. They are a standard because it's for beginners. And since it's for beginners, we tend to have the bare minimum of the action. So when we have bare minimum action, you tend to remove a lot of things that might make your animation more special. And yung standard templates natin, they tend to be a bit more robotic. So for you to make it simpler, you have to remove a lot more things. And if you remove a lot of more things, then you probably might make it a bit more robotic. So with that one, when we're creating animations, both for character animation and effects animation, we would like to make them as organic as possible, or ibig sabihin, it looks more natural. So to make it more natural, we tend to add more exaggerations, or we tend to change a little bit of the standard. So when you personalize your animation, it can do a lot of things. So the first thing that I've stated a while ago is that it makes it more organic. So it makes the action look more natural, even though technically speaking, you're doing exaggerations or distortions that might not be the same. Next one is you're making your animation more unique. So when we say unique, that translates more into interesting. So when you make your animation unique, you might make it a bit more different you might make it different compared to that of the standard. And depending on how you make it different is how you can make it interesting. So the modifications would depend on what you would like, what the animator would like, what the studio might like, what the audience might like. So yung mga preferences na yun can really come from anywhere. Pero for your activity, you can just focus on your own preferences. What do you think is most important in a walk cycle? So is it more of the legs? Is it a lot of focus on the secondary action? Is it more of the subtlety? Yung mga ganun. And lastly, if you have followed creating better unique animations, you can essentially make you can add a lot more character to your works. When you add character to your works, or when you make it special, so usually when you kind of put a lot of emotion into your animation, it can translate as a powerful theme or emotion. So if you can, animation at the end of the day is still an art. So when you create an art, whether that be a drawing, an illustration, a dance, music, singing, and so on and so forth, when you add these different types of characters, it can give off something that would be well beyond our human understanding. So another thing is that when you give more character to your works, aside from giving a more powerful theme or emotion, you can essentially give a whole story with just a normal walk cycle. So you don't even have to say that this person is like this person is like that. You can just show them using a walk. So parang medyo segue lang to. Before this entire plague thing happened, what we were supposed to do for actually animation 12A and 12B, ang pinapagawa namin dati is that you would have to create your own animation. I'm saying it right now, wala tayong means para gawin yun. So we'll just be focusing on parang mga activities lang. Pero back then, when they had to create their own animation, they had to create their own story. They can make their own decisions in making an animation. So for a lot of them, they actually opt to create silent movies or silent animations. Kasi when you add voiceovers, when you add dialogue, you have to do two things. You have to do number one, you have to add something which we call as mouth codes, which is quite difficult to create. So if you're looking at Japanese animation, their mouths are just going like wah 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 wah. Pero for Western animation, you really have to time it. The second one is that you also have to create your own dub. So you will have to create your own voiceover. So for them, it might be a bit more complicated. So a lot of them tend to opt for more silent animations. But actually, a lot of silent animations are more different, or they're actually a bit more difficult compared to that of spoken animations. Kasi yung spoken animations natin, if you want to say na this person is doing this, you can just say it. Or this person has this personality, you can just say it. Or like, let's say for you to convey emotions without dialogue, that is a bit more complicated. So with that one, that's something that it's a bit more challenging. So that's more of how you add your character, how you add character to your works, how you personalize them. So how do you add character to your works? So one of the most basic things that you can actually do is to create your own, to mimic your own actions. So if you were to see in an animation studio, a lot of the animators tend to have their own mirrors. Sa may loob ng studio mismo, they have sections wherein they have full body mirrors. So yung facial expressions nila, if they need to animate it, they'll have to do it on their own. If they need to do an action like a walk cycle, they'll also have to do it. So aside from the observational skills that's necessary for an animator, it's also recommended that an animator also do the actions that they're supposed to do so that they can have an idea of how the animation would work. Because if you don't understand how the animation works, then it won't translate well. So with that one, I do recommend this one. So pag hindi nyo patapos yung module 9 ninyo, try to look at the standard walk cycle. So this one right here, try to do it on your own. If you have a full body mirror at home or at least a big enough mirror wherein you can see your entire body, try to do it on your own para makita ninyo how it actually works. So try to do your own walk, yung normal, wherein nakikita nyo lang is contact passing, and so on. And then try to recreate this on your own. So I don't really I would like you to do this on your own time if you would like to do it. Actually, if we were face to face right now, I would probably ask one of you to do it. Pero since hindi naman pwede ang face to face, then I'll just entrust that you will be doing this. So let's also try to have one more example like this. Anyway, next one is we have a short review on how you will be doing a head turn. So this is how you can kind of like personalize your animation. So we have your head turn side to side, which is kind of like more of your module 8, which is the head turn. Pero medyo different yung head turn na to because it's side to side. So when you do a normal head turn, or probably when you did your head turn activity, the normal head turn is fine. This one right here. Wherein dapat more or less you're just doing a slow in and slow out. I think for you guys, you move fast and then slowly it becomes slower. So we have right here a normal path of action na straight lang siya. It's horizontal. We also don't have a lot of emotion change. So that's your very bare minimum head turn. So when you animate this, yeah, you can tell that it's a head turn. Pero how you make it different makes it interesting. So the curved path of action is one of the ways on how you can modify it. So usually, yung movements natin is more curved. So to make it more organic, we tend to move within a curved line. So probably for some of you, when you turn your head, it's a bit straighter. Pero you would kind of see some path of action if you follow the tip of your nose. Pero if you kind of move your head downwards a little bit, then that would make it a bit more interesting. So we have an example right here. Another one is blinking. So blinking is one of those subtle facial movements. Now, when you're creating a cycle, it kind of doesn't look right when you do just a head turn, tapos walang changes on the face. That doesn't really look normal. But if you try to blink every now and then it looks a bit more organic. So probably what you might want to do is to place it within a portion of your animation. Hindi naman sa may pinaka-start and pinaka-end. So we have one right here. We also have how you're going to add facial expressions. So probably from the start, you have a neutral facial expression, and then at the very end, it becomes shock. So that may make it more interesting. So in terms of why did that person do a head turn in the first place? Because probably they heard something, and then what they saw when they turned their head is the one that made the sound. Parang ganon. So those are just some ways on how you can personalize an animation. Before you can personalize an animation, you also have to understand the basics of in-betweening. Kaya nga, yung pinakalas na ginagawa natin is usually to personalize an animation, and then from that point, to make the animation, and then personalize sa may pinakalas. Because you have to understand the very basics of in-betweening. Kind of like similarly of what you did for your animation 11A and 11B. Tinuro sa inyo yung basic proportions of, or yung basic anatomy of a human. Pero when you see right now sa may animation 12A is that you're not really required to make a realistic anatomically realistic character. Kahit na chibi yan, kahit na Western, Japanese animation, we're not really focusing on that one. The reason why we're doing that one is because for you to understand the anatomy and the physiology of your character. So that pag nag-stylize ka na when you add more style to it, hindi nawawala yung physiology that might be necessary when you're going to animate it. So, like let's say when you're going to create a chibi character, that might be a bit more challenging for a walk cycle. So, you'll have to do some compensations for it. So anyway, if you don't understand how to do in-betweening, you would kind of have mistakes in your personalized animation. So it is important for you to understand the common mistakes in in-betweening before we move on to the other parts of the animation. So the basic idea of our in-betweening is finding the middlemost point. So like for example, from point A to point B, hahanapin mo yung pinakagitnang distance. If you're going to move, if you have an object that's slowly growing bigger, you're going to find the middlemost point, volume, and whichever. So that's the basic premise. However, there are a lot of actions that don't necessarily follow those cases. So that's why it's important for you to always observe your surroundings, how an action would work. That is also why it's important for you to do the action so that you would see na, okay, maybe in this situation, just finding the middlemost point doesn't necessarily work. So with that one, aside from observing, aside from doing it, it might also be quite helpful for you to see some examples of what I mean by this one. For example is perspective drawing. So perspective drawing, I believe you know it, na medyo mahirap gumawa ng perspective drawing. So with that one, however, it's something that's quite important for animation kasi one of the principles is solid drawing. And at the same time, having an idea of three-dimensionality, ibig sabihin you're going to make it so that it looks three-dimensional, even though that you're using a two-dimensional space, which is paper or canvas. It's quite important for you to also learn how to make it three-dimensional. So if in case you have this type of perspective drawing, hindi ka nawawala. So we have examples right here for foreshortening, point perspective, turning, and the like. So if you see a lot of animations, yung head turn natin is something that's quite happening a lot, but you don't see it happening slowly. So if ever there's a head turn, it's usually just 3 frames. So yung 2 keyframes and then one 2 keyframes and then one in between. So yung in between na yun usually has more animation blurs or animation smears so that mas mabilis yung action natin. Because creating a head turn is actually very complex if you actually think about it. So if you create like a slow head turn, madaling makakita ng mistakes. So with that one, we have an over-exaggeration of what we mean when we say taking in-betweening literally and not seeing that it's a 3-dimension. So sabihin natin you don't know the context. So sa atin kasi we kind of know the context. We're going to turn our head. So we know that a head from side to side medyo spherical siya. So that when it moves at the middle, we're not just seeing the side view. We're not just seeing any type of view. We kind of understand na yung pinakagitna ng dalawang sides natin is the front view. You can even do it yourself. So pag like let's say you're facing towards one side. So right now I'm facing nearer towards the mic. Tapos I'm going to turn my head patalikod away from the mic. I would see na yung pinakagitna natin is that it's a front view. So you can try it yourself. However, if you don't try it yourself, you don't understand the context, and you don't know that this is a head turn, you might make something like this. So let's try to analyze why this happened. So if you're going to find the literal version of in-betweening, you might see something like this. So you have 2 circles right here, may konting distance sa kanila. So you would find the middlemost point, which is right here, which is correct. And then we have here in terms of the sizing. So it's 2 circles, walang pinagkaiba it's 2 spheres rather. Walang pinagkaiba in terms of its sizing. So of course, it's just going to be a circle at the very middle. So that's correct. Yung sa may nose natin, this is a bit more lucky in terms of how it's created. So if you don't understand na this is a nose, you might just think of it as a circle at the left side and then a circle at the right side. So yung middlemost point ng right and left is nasa gitna. And then you would have around the same size because by sheer luck again, more or less parehas yung sizing ng nose. So you have something like this. So The first one, yung entire basic shapes na circle natin is tama. The second one, which is the nose right here, supposedly, is made out of shear luck. This is where it kind of gets wrong. So you have here a dot. If you don't realize that this is an eye, you probably might think of this as a dot. This is another dot. So if you're going to find the middlemost point of this dot right here, which is probably right around the leftmost part, and this eye right here, which is at the rightmost part, hahanapin mo yung gitna, and then you would just come up with one dot. And then that's kind of like the same with the smiley face as well. So walang pinagkaiba in terms of its distancing at the very middle. So you would place it at the middle right here. And then this one, hahanapin mo ulit yung gitna. So you're essentially just creating a straight line. So if you take the idea of in-betweening very seriously, that might be something that might happen. So it's a more extreme case, but it clearly generates, or it clearly gives the idea of what it can actually do. Here we have telephone lines. So this is more of perspective drawing. So probably you might recognize this as one-point perspective, wherein the left pole right here is closer towards the camera. The right pole right here, which is smaller, is nearer towards the horizon, or it's nearer towards the vanishing point. That's why it's smaller. So even though technically you might place this in a more 2D space, they should be around the same sizing. Pero for this one, they're not. So if you just find, or if you just do the normal in-betweening, or hahanapin mo yung middlemost point, that might not be ideal. Because as you can see right here, if you're going to make it flat, the distance between your first keyframe and your in-between might be smaller compared to that of the distance between your in-between and then your second keyframe. The best way on how you can create it is for you to kind of like create this box. So itong box na to, if you were to create it as flat, is just going to be a normal rectangle. And then you've created a cross in it so that pag na-imagine nyo yung sa may gitna, or if you na-imagine nyo na siya na flat, you would find that the intersection of the cross is the middlemost point. So you would have it around here. Next one is preemptive distortion. Preemptive distortion kind of follows the first law of motion. So an object won't necessarily do something unless something acts upon it. So like for example, if there is no force acting upon it, then there should be no distortion that's happening. So one example, or actually there are three examples right here, pero the first one is a mallet. So yung sa may mallet natin, you can see right here, we have two objects. So you have the mallet and then you have the nail. So the movement of the mallet for both of them are the same. Kasi essentially, you're just following a path of action that's kind of like swooping downwards towards the nail. Pero let's focus at the movement of the nail. If you had a little bit, if you were to think about this logically, you would see that because the mallet hasn't struck the nail yet, the nail would not distort. Pero sa may second one, if you think about it more as an in-betweening or literal in-betweening, you would just notice the movement of the nail and then you would distort it. Even though na yung nail natin dito has not struck the mallet yet. And the reason kung bakit siya nag-distort dito is that because there is a contact between the mallet and the nail here. Next one is for water droplet. So same din. The reason kung bakit nagkaroon ng splashing dito is because of the contact with the ground. So since there is no contact with the ground, there should be no splashing coming on preemptively. And another thing, you might think na parang merong kailangang may squash and stretch because there's acceleration and wind resistance. So for water droplets, particularly rain, kaya hindi masakit yung rain when it hits your skin. When even though na technically your rain comes from 1,000 meters above ground, is because of terminal velocity. So terminal velocity essentially means na it's just constantly at 1 meter per second, I believe. So walang acceleration na nangyayari. And then for the falling ball. So there are actually two ways on how to make it correct, or let's see how you can do it incorrectly. So the first keyframe right here is the normal sized ball, which is on the air. And then the second keyframe right here, wherein the ball touches the ground. So since it has a strong contact with the ground, you would see a little bit of squash. You don't see any squashing when it is mid-air. So hindi dapat siya nagdi-distort this way when it's mid-air. It can distort in another way, so we'll be talking about that later. Pero for now, two ways on how you can do this is the first one is walang pinagkaiba because there's not much force acting upon it. So this is more for a bit stronger object, like let's say a rubber ball, plastic ball, and so on and so forth. But if you have, like, let's say a water balloon, there might be a bit more stretching. So itong stretching na to is because the material can't really handle the acceleration and the wind resistance that's coming from it falling downwards. So pag nagganito, nagkaroon siya ng squash. And it also kind of follows the idea na before magkakaroon ng stretch, before magkakaroon ng squash, there is usually a stretch that comes before it. Last example of how you can create a mistake in in-betweening is the disregard of joints. So for the disregard of joints, this is a bit more complicated because how the joints of my fingers move versus how the joints of my toes move is different. How my fingers would move versus how your fingers might move might be different. So probably for some of us, double-jointed sila, so how their joints might work might be a bit different. So with that one, it is better for you to observe and again, look at different case studies of how you might do some of these things. But let's just have a few examples. First one is how you're going to do a foot for a walk cycle. So usually, when you create a foot for a walk cycle, we can have 1 foot off the ground. So if there is 1 foot on the ground and like let's say this foot is off the ground, that's quite okay. Pero when it comes to, like let's say when you think about it, you can't really balance that much if you have your feet mostly off the ground. So even though na it's possible for you to balance out yourself, even though with just 1 foot, you don't want to burden the person with that one. So as much as possible, at least both of the feet should be on the ground. So we have right here, the one at the right, wherein in terms of its path of action, tama naman siya. So it's barely touching the surface of the ground. So it's actually not touching, but only barely. So with this one, it's quite correct in terms of its path of action, but it's improper because you're lifting up your foot much more than it's necessary. It is possible for you to just have a portion of the foot on the ground to maintain that balance for a walk cycle. Next one is a pointing finger. So probably you might want to do this on your own. So I'll entrust na ginagawa niyo siya. So when you point your finger, so probably what you would like to do is to create a fist. You can use any hand as naka-side view. Your thumbs are in front of you. So your hands are in a fist or your hand is in a fist. And then you slowly unravel your pointing finger so that it points at something. So if you were to notice on it, it's not entirely like a springboard. Kasi yung springboard natin is that you kind of treat your finger as one object. Tapos it's just moving at a curved path of action. If you see the tip of your finger as the basis, you would kind of see na yung movement nung path of action natin is that it's more of a U shape. So almost magsuswirl siya actually. So with that one, you would kind of see that the way that your fingers unravel is not isang bagsakan na parang springboard, but it's more joint by joint. So your fingers have joints in them. There are actually 3, including your knuckle. So how you manipulate them actually depends on how your pointing finger would unravel. So of course, from a fist, medyo itataas mo or medyo isa-stretch mo yung knuckle mo, so that the first portion of your finger is the one that is unraveled. So essentially, your entire finger is still curved. Parang siyang square. So parang naka-square shape siya. But it's off your other fingers. And then next one is that you'll be bending your next joint so that parang medyo naka-point siya but not entirely. And then you stretch it out until you're able to get that entire pointing finger. So those are just some ways on how you can see na yung joints natin don't really work with just the conventional path of action, finding the middlemost point, and so on and so forth. So now let's have a short review for the standard walk cycle. So for the standard walk cycle, there are usually 4 typical poses. This is the standard walk cycle, and you are required to create your own walk. However, when you're creating your own walk, please take note of the following. Number one, please do not disregard the walk cycle entirely. You will be using still the same 4 poses times 2 para maging 8 for you to be able to create your walk cycle. So the poses in here will be used as a basis, so you can modify them, but you have to start off with these ones first. That's why I asked you to do a standard walk cycle first before a personalized walk cycle, so that you would kind of understand how the movement works and how it would affect the entire walk cycle itself. Next one is whenever you're adding modifications to your walk cycle, it has to be tasteful. So when you say tasteful, you don't add every single thing that I'm going to tell you. So don't add weight shift, don't add together with your weight shift, you might do foot action, leg placement, torso, lahat-lahat na. Nagdagdag ka pa ng tempo, nagdagdag ka pinalitan mo pa from favors, from thirds to favors. So with that one, it's a bit more confusing. So the reason why it's a standard walk cycle is that because it works. So if you modify it so much that it's distorted, it might not even look like a walk cycle in the end. So add a little bit, probably mga around 3 modifications, so that it's different enough, it's interesting enough compared to that of a normal walk cycle, but at the same time, it still looks like a walk cycle. Next one is, let's move on to considerations in creating a walk cycle. So when you're thinking about your, when you're creating or when you're planning your walk cycle, you have to take note of some of the things that are within your control, and then some of these considerations will now be applying how you're going to personalize your walk cycle. Reminder lang pala, some of these things are a bit more stereotypical. They're a bit more, it's a product of their time. So this was published, or the main reference was published 2001. So with this one, even a lot of the things that I'm going to be discussing for today, you see in a lot of modern animations. But if you think na, this is a bit more dated, then you can go against it if you would like to. Anyway, let's go back. We have here age. So for the age, usually for a lot of us, we tend to create more teenager or adult kind of characters. For some of us might have more chibi characters, so that's a bit closer to infant characters, and probably for more elderly characters. So like, let's say when you create childlike, chibi-like characters, their legs aren't fully developed, or their legs aren't long enough so that you're able to display the proper walk cycle. So with that one, kailangan mo mag-overcompensate. So when we say overcompensate, like let's say yung contact point natin, it's a bit more diagonal. So you'll have to make it more feet apart para makita talaga yung difference sa contact. Then yung lowest point, medyo naka-bend, kailangan mo pang i-bend ng mas lalo so that you have to exaggerate the movement because you can't really showcase that when you have limited amount of spacing, like yung legs natin. For elderly, in terms of their physiology as well as their age, their movements might become different. They might become slower. The movement on their shoulders and arms are limited, and also they have smaller steps compared to that of teenagers and adults. Next one is we have sex or gender identity. So we have here 2 types of footprints. So the first one at the top is more of an effeminate or feminine type of walk cycle, and then we have a more masculine type of walk cycle. If you were to see the feminine walk cycle, you can see na they're kind of like walking in a tightrope. They walk in terms of smaller steps. So there are a lot of factors why that happens. So probably your character is wearing a tight skirt, like a pencil skirt, or even heels, so that might impede more of their walk cycle, or they need to walk more cautiously than, let's say, their male counterparts. It can also be possible that for female characters, they tend to protect their crotch a lot, so limited lang yung movement ng thighs, so limited din yung movement ng feet. And also for women, they tend to move more in terms of their hips. So the swaying of the hips is much more apparent compared to that of their male counterparts. For your masculine walk cycle, as you can see right here, the strides are longer, the differences in the footprints are longer. Again, it's also because of the crotch area. So with that one, they have to have their thighs a bit more apart. And since they have longer legs, it's more possible, and they don't really have a lot of restrictions, it is more possible for them to walk much more efficiently, so to speak, because of those limitations or because of those situations. And also for males, for women, if women naman focuses on their hips, for male, they tend to focus more on their shoulders. So their shoulders move a lot more when they're moving or when they're walking. Next one is body composition. So if you're thin, if you're a bit fatter, female, elderly. So let's try to have more of your fatter characters. So when you have fatter characters, or when you have, like, let's say soft, if you have like, let's say breasts or buttocks or more emphasized soft muscles, we have something which we call as counteraction, which is essentially the idea of drag in a walk cycle. So that's something that we'll be looking into a little bit later. And then we have emotion, situation, and style. So emotion, situation, and style is actually one of the bigger drivers on how you can create your own walk cycle. So yeah, you can have differences between a masculine and a feminine walk cycle, where there's you don't really see that difference as much. Pero if, like, let's say you differentiate a happy walk cycle compared to that of a sad walk cycle, then you might see a lot more difference. So for emotion, this is one of the bigger factors in creating a walk cycle, so much more than situation or style. So how your character walks based on the emotion that they are feeling right now can then dictate how their walk cycle is. So for example, if your character is happy, siguro in your own situation, nakabili ka ng PS5 or something, is that anyway, sorry. So, for that one, if you're, sabihin natin, if ikaw, bibili ka ng PS5, when you're going towards the pre-order store, you might be walking a bit faster, your movements are a bit more skipping, they're almost bouncing, they have lighter movements. Pero if you're sad, like, let's say you just broke up with someone, then your movement is a bit slower. So, you have more slumping on the back and shoulders, you're almost dragging your feet because of that one. We also have here situation. So for situation naman, we have here mostly an extension of the emotion, or like, let's say, because of this, it can create an emotion. So I don't really see a lot of people using this one more. So a lot more people would be using the emotion one. Next one is for style. So style is essentially the overall way of how a character walks, unaffected by their emotion. So there might be some sort of confusion, because I do understand na sometimes the way that you walk might be based on your emotions. So like, let's say when you're a naturally extroverted person, you might be a bit more confident naturally. So the way that you walk is more confident, even though that's just a way that you actually walk. Whereas for like, let's say typically introverted people, they tend to look at the ground when they walk. So that might be more in terms of emotion na shy sila. Either way, it can work. As long as you label it properly, then I would be able to understand. Next one, how you can modify a walk cycle. So medyo bibilisan ko lang to because a lot of these ones were dictated on your module 9. So for this one, aside from the content that was placed in your module 9, we also have here some effects on what can happen. So for example, if your heel is always on the ground, that would mean that there is a heavier weight. Ibig sabihin you're stomping. If your heel is usually off the ground, then you tend to skip. You might have a more positive emotion, for example. So we have heel, we have foot action, we have weight shift, belt line, how your hips move or movement, eto, counteraction. So counteraction is essentially drag. It only refers to any other secondary movement that can affect the movement of a body in a walk cycle. So anything that might be created using, or any type of secondary action that might be affected by the walk cycle, that's your counteraction. Ang basic premise natin dito is that the movement of the vertical axis. So how it goes up, how it goes down. So like, let's say for example, if your character goes down, kind of like a contact or a lowest point, then your counteraction is to go up. Kaya nga siya tawag na counteraction. If your character goes up, kind of like a passing or highest point, then the counteraction goes down. So we have here some examples like soft muscles, which includes breast, buttocks, a fat stomach, you might even want to emphasize more of the thighs, any type of soft muscle that might affect counteraction. We also have here hair movement, and we also have here hat movement. So, nakalagay dito sa may hat movement na when you're taking into consideration yung movement ng character is that there should be some restraint. So, like for example, probably for some of you, you might tend to focus on yung juggling ng breasts and nung buttocks ng female natin. Try to minimize that because not only is it kind of gross, you might also take away more of, paano ba? You might even take away more of the walk cycle. So, ang pinaka main focus ng walk cycle natin is the walk. So, everything else should be secondary, and your secondary action should be the ones that would enhance the movement of the walk cycle. So, it shouldn't really take away from that. Next one, getting the weight. So, for getting the weight, ito pala yung modifying a walk cycle. So, for modifying a walk cycle, this is more of based from the things that you can change, how can you modify them? So, for this one, marami namang mga instructions on how you can do it. So, getting the weight, if you would like to add more weight shift, setting the tempo. So, if you want a slower run or if you want a more smoother walk, then probably you might want to do something like this. But I don't really recommend it since this takes up a bit more time. So if you add more drawings, that's possible for you, but at the same time, you don't really want to do it as much. Next one is we have the passing position or the breakdown. So the passing position is actually a more subtler way on how you can modify your walk cycle. And then from your walk cycle, you can have right here, you can then change yung lowest point and highest point natin based from that one. So if you try to bend, if you try to slump your back a little bit, that would kind of affect also the movement of your lowest point and highest point. And then loosening it up, essentially how you're going to move your shoulders and your hips. So this is more for effeminate or masculine walk cycles. If you want to express more machismo, so to speak, you might want to move more of the arms forwards and backwards. Head movement. Essentially, ang movement ng head natin should only be within one axis. So what do I mean by that one? If you move it from forward to back, dapat front back lang siya. If you move it from side to side, dapat side to side lang siya. If it's fixed at one position, like let's say you want to just stare at a person, that's also possible. But if you're, like let's say, if you want to move your head back and forth and at the same time move it from side to side or move it up and down, that might be a bit more that might not look good for head movement. So just focus on one, either side to side, up and down, front or back. We also have here breaking the joint, which is a more complicated one because it focuses on foreshortening. And for others, we have the double bounce, which is an extension of how you're going to change your passing pose. Essentially, yung passing pose kasi natin dito is that it should be straight out, the one that is planted on the ground. Or this one is bent, so it has to compensate for the lowest point and highest point, so that has to be a bit more straight. And getting vitality in a walk cycle, cleaning the body, and so on and so forth. So medyo bilisan ko lang tong angry walk cycle so that you would have an idea on how to actually do it. So for this one, I'll be starting off with the steps that I actually demonstrated in last time. So if you remember, so before that, let me just discuss on how you can create your, or how you can modify your walk cycle. So the one that I am creating right now is an angry walk cycle. So for your angry walk cycle, there are some considerations that you have to focus on. So the main thing that I actually focused on is how your feet are stomping. So like let's say pag galit ka, or when pag nagtatampo ka, usually you would tend to stomp more of your feet. So with that one, that's more of my very basics. And then from that point on, medyo mapapalitan na yung movement niya. So we have right here, for me to be able to create more motion for my walk cycle, for me to create more effect on my stomping foot, I might want to lessen yung movement ng hips natin, which is the one that I'm doing right now. So lesser movement lang tayo. Sorry, let me just change the frame rate. Okay, so probably it would look more like that. So lesser movement in terms of the weight shift right here. And then again, I'm just going to focus on my basic steps. It would be much better if you have your walk cycle as a basis. So if you can open that one and then use it as a basis, see it in another screen, have it on your phone or whichever. Basta dapat meron tayong basis. So you're not supposed to create your own walk cycle based on what you think the walk cycle is. Always have it on your person. Ignoring the total disregard for perspective, more or less okay naman yung movement natin. So with that one, you can kind of see a more streamlined movement, but you can also see that the movement in terms of the feet is that it's almost dragging actually. So most of the level on your feet is on the ground. Tapos, next layer naman natin is for the torso. So in terms of the torso, medyo okay. Lastly, we have for the arms. So for the arms, there are actually two things that you can do. So you can just have the feet or the arms locked downwards. So I can just do that one. Or something a bit more creative. Probably I would just place. There we go. So that's more or less how you can do an angry walk cycle. So whenever you're planning a walk cycle, try to have an enduring idea of it or just have a main idea. Focus on one thing that you would really want to change, and then based from that one, everything else would follow. So in this walk cycle, I really wanted to focus on the stomping feet, and then at the same time yung sa may arms natin, even though that it's a secondary action, is that I'm just essentially making sure that my movements are a bit more robotic by ensuring that there is a consistent angle within the arm. So afterwards, you might probably just want to do some changes. So for me, probably I would just like to change some movement in the feet, pero the movement of like let's say the legs is generally okay. So with that one, I apologize for taking up so much of your time. If you have any questions, please let me know na lang sa may group chat natin. And with that one, have a nice day ahead. Bye bye.